Hello, my dear viewers. I'm glad you're here. I'm Olga Demchuk, a researcher of the inner world of personality. Today, we will talk about relationships, or more precisely, about losing oneself in contact. I think you've all experienced that moment when a wonderful person or a terrible person appears and you realize that they're going to be in your head for a long time. You stop thinking about yourself and constantly think about them. Right now, I'm not just talking about love or just about admiration for someone. These feelings can be completely opposite as well. And this other person, meaning not you, gradually, as if evicts you from yourself. Do you remember the fairy tale about the little hare and the fox when the fox built a house out of ice? And it melted while the little hare had a bark hut, and the fox, she came to him, drove the little hare out, and he was left homeless. The same thing happens to us in relationships when we make someone else the center of our world. We ourselves end up homeless, much like restless, wandering souls who simply cannot find a place of refuge or a sense of belonging. Now let's try to deeply and thoroughly understand exactly why all of this begins and explore the most effective ways to deal with it. Today I have prepared some diagrams for you. And in this diagram, I have schematically depicted myself as the center of the world. And along a trajectory around it, another person revolves. At the very beginning of our lives, it is a caring adult who revolves along this trajectory. CA stands for caring adults. That is, when a child is in the mother's womb, the caring adult is the mother. Her entire body functions for the child. In the same way, when a child is born, everyone knows, even those who have never had children, that if you even get a little kitten, your whole life starts to revolve around it. And this rotation of the caring adult around the child is an inevitable stage that we all go through. That is why it is imprinted in our memory, either as being in the womb, which we later long for as a place of unconditional happiness, or as that state when you are lying down and someone is running around you, completely taking care of all your needs. That is in all of our lives. For a long or short time, there was a moment when the golden fish itself was at our beck and call. The caring adult. And at some point, when the child begins to grow up, that is, when they can already fulfill certain duties, can take responsibility for something, the parent or caring adult begins to reduce their guardianship over them and to demand more from them. For example, you certainly wouldn't tell a tiny 3-month-old baby to put away their toys, but a 2-year-old toddler already clearly understands exactly what it means to tidy up their playthings. You wouldn't say, please take out the trash, to a 1-year-old child. But a 9-year-old child is already quite capable of handling that. That is, as we grow older, it seems that our responsibilities also increase, at least in comparison with the previous stages. Now, I believe you can now fully appreciate the reasons why so many people are hesitant to enter the world of adulthood. And when a child becomes increasingly self-sufficient and capable, the parent begins to slowly shift them toward the outer edges of their daily lives. In other words, the child is no longer, as in the previous illustration, the center of the universe. Instead, the child feels like a satellite orbiting around the parent. This is when we look for the right moment, hoping that the parent or the caring adult is in a good mood, when we actively attempt to positively influence that current emotional state and their general attitude toward us. That is, the child is forced to be manipulative because their life directly depends on the caring adult. That is exactly right. This is logical and completely beyond any shadow of a doubt. All children are essentially hostages and captives of their parents, regardless of the specific nature or character of those parents, because a child is simply not yet capable of being self-sufficient. And this inherent state of being a satellite, especially after that initial state when I was the sun or the earth. The parent used to revolve around me like the moon, but now it is experienced as a lowering of status. And in this lowering of status, from the perspective of classical psychoanalysis, one could say that this is the first narcissistic trauma. That is, when I stopped being the center of the universe. And this orbiting around the parent is always perceived as martyrdom. Because I am no longer the center, my status has been lowered. Now I have to revolve around my parents and do what they say. These demands keep growing as if I need to do more and more. I went to kindergarten, then I had to go to school, then to university, and then start earning money. That is, if the personality does not mature, there is a sense that all the best things were left in childhood, while the burden here just keeps getting heavier and heavier. And at some point, the parent should, in a way, let the child go, but this doesn't happen all at once. It happens gradually. In other words, the child should be raised so that the parent, on the contrary, gives them more responsibility, wherever possible, so that the child gradually learns to rely on themselves. So, assigning the child those responsibilities they are already capable of handling and doing so at the right time will naturally meet with some resistance from the child. But on the other hand, this is an investment in their future, in their ability to rely on themselves. And when parents actively work to build a deep, meaningful relationship with their child as an equal, almost as a peer, in accordance with the child's current age and development, then the child will naturally begin to is already able to make decisions independently, and the parent sees that the child is reasonable, that they have taught the child to think, and they imagine this idealistic scenario. I have never met a single person for whom it actually worked out that way. Well, maybe such people exist somewhere. In any case, we can come up with such an ideal scenario together. And so the parent stops controlling the child because the child relies on their own thinking. It is reasonable, and so on and so forth. And the child sets off on their own, meaning separation occurs. But this is an ideal picture. Even if it does happen, then the child may repeat all of this in adult relationships. Now, just a little bit about those adult relationships. A bit later, in just a couple of seconds, very often a child imagines their dream is to become a caring adult with everyone else revolving around them. And it's a problem when a person does not recognize their similarities with their parents. This is a problem because the person's worldview becomes distorted. That is, we are all similar to our parents, and unconsciously, we strive to behave with others the way our parents behaved with us. Because for a child, this is perceived as the highest level. This is the king around whom I revolve, and my dream is to become such a king so that the whole world revolves around me. And a person can live with this mindset for a very long time, waiting for that moon that will revolve around them. But now let's move on to adult relationships where another person appears. This other person could be, for example, a teacher, maybe a dance instructor or a coach. It could be a university professor. It could be infatuation or it could be friendship. But right now we are talking about relationships that are not equal, but rather follow the pattern of a satellite and a planet. The satellite revolves around the planet. That is to say, a person might suddenly rebel and break away from their parents, completely refuse their advice and say, I don't listen to you anymore, that's it, I'm finally independent and free. But at the very same time, they will often build the exact same pattern of behavior with someone else in their life. And then this other person moves to the center of the universe, this other person. And the personality, which is marked as I, initially perceives itself by reflecting in this person. But gradually it slips to the point where it moves to the periphery and begins to revolve around this other personality. I think each of you can recall moments when, in a certain idealization, you perceived another person as the center of the universe, as the meaning of life. In other words, the other person becomes the meaning of life. There was a cartoon about a piglet and an elephant, and in it the elephant quarreled with the piglet and then walked around singing, by the light of the sun and the moon, I walk along the roads, and all my thoughts are filled with nothing but piglets. This is precisely a moment of dependence on another, and a person can remain in the orbit of this luminary for quite a long time. That is to say, the other person becomes just as significant a factor, almost like an adult. This is the one thanks to whom I live, for whom I live, the one who gives my life meaning. For example, there are people who do not enter into relationships alone. They intuitively understand that if they do, they will become like this. In other words, they will become a satellite and lose themselves, or some people even refuse to have children simply because they are afraid that the child will become the center and they will lose themselves. Some people do not understand this intuitively, but when another person appears, they first enter into a more or less equal relationship. And then at some point I become the satellite, or the other person becomes the satellite. Or when a child is born, even as the child grows up, they still remain the center of my universe, and my whole life revolves around them. And it is quite difficult for a person to remain in such a state, in a lost sense of self. They remain in this state, but intuitively they always want to break free. And this captivity is not physical. A person may not even live physically with this other person, but still be emotionally attached. For example, parents who have made their child the meaning of their life, they revolve around the child and have no life of their own. And many people live this way. They find pleasure in the fact that another person becomes the meaning of their life. Well, that's the kind of decision they make. Some even derive satisfaction from pleasing others. From feeling that they are absolutely essential, they earn their sense of value and importance this way. They don't need their own individuality, because you see, individuality, when you start to figure it out, what am I myself? What can I do on my own? Where should I strive? It's not so simple and clear. A husband, a wife, a child, parents. You make them the center, you take care of them, and you have a purpose in life. It's a simple option, really. But there are moments when, in certain situations, the other person can disappoint you or do something unexpected. For example, a husband might cheat on his wife, or a wife might cheat on her husband. And then everything changes. The whole system collapses, and it feels like I can no longer make that person the center of my universe. Or you find out that your friend has been saying something bad about you behind your back, has been talking, and the whole system collapses. In other words, that person is no longer the center of the universe. Or, for example, the blogger I idealized changed their point of view, and the whole system collapses. It collapses in reality, but in your mind it remains. In your mind, everything stays the same. And the person descends into hell. They begin to live in a kind of hell where they continue to think about the other person, unable to talk about themselves without referencing the other. Their thoughts are still occupied with the other person, but now it's all in a negative context. That is, I can't stop talking about my ex, I can't stop talking about my boss, I can't stop talking about my therapist, I can't stop talking about my husband. In other words, when I restrain myself, I can still manage not to talk about it, but if I get carried away, I start talking about this other person who remains the center of my universe. Often in psychoanalysis, a person comes in and cannot talk about themselves. They can't do it without referencing their wife or husband or child. So this third party, this outsider, is always present in the conversation, and the person does not understand what is happening, but they remain captive. Only now they are trapped as if frying in a pan, tormented by these hateful thoughts that irritate them. Sometimes the only way to break away from another person is to completely demonize them. That is, instead of moving into their own orbit, the person demonizes this center in order to escape its pull. They say nasty things, the most disgusting, the darkest things one can imagine. And this kind of separation is always painful. Only a mature person can leave a relationship without demonizing the other, without scandal, without quarrels. A mature person can calmly understand that our paths are simply diverging. For example, if a man says to a woman, "Thank you for the years you were by my side. We will still communicate. We are not strangers, but we cannot live together." This is a calm attitude towards someone with whom you have shared a certain period of your life. And many people create so many entities that we end up with a whole bunch of them. These are the unresolved situations where they keep spinning around, caught up in all these hellish thoughts. And why am I telling you all this? I don't know about you, but when I understand what is happening to me, it becomes much easier for me to put an end to it. So, first and foremost, you need to realize that you have gotten into this situation. This often happens, for example, when a man marries an idealized woman, and then it turns out she is not such a fairy after all, and he, not realizing that he is in this erased state, having lost his individuality, something that was instilled in him in childhood, now, like a satellite, he doesn't understand why he can't leave the relationship. Or, for example, a young woman marries an older man, and for a while she hangs on his every word. He is like a guru to her. But then she matures, and that's it. It's time to leave. And this departure, if you don't understand all these patterns, will end with you creating yet another idol for yourself. And your only dream will be for you to become the idol yourself. That's why people who are not used to communicating as equals, where is our equality? Let's find it now. Here is our equality. So people who are not used to interacting as equals, who haven't broken free from being fixated on themselves, they keep ending up in these strange relationships. Either you will be my companion, or I will be a companion who revolves around myself. And in this companion, in companion mode, it's quite difficult because you realize that you're no longer shining with your own light. And this light, it has to be acquired, just like with individuation. There are many videos about this, how to step out of the world of your own name, and the book as well. There are many videos about that too. But we will talk about relationships in more detail at the School of Relationships. It will begin in early December on the website olgademchuk.org. Registration is open, so we will... Here, I just gave you a brief overview. But at the School of Relationships, we will go through all of this in much more detail. Of course, with exercises and discussions on how to be equals. A lot of time at this school will be devoted to conversations and relationships. So register, come join us, and see you in the next videos. And as always, I ask you to like and leave comments, share your feedback about what you think on all these topics. That's all for now. Goodbye.